are the instigators of the violence and the looting? If they're organized or loosely organized, is there a way you can tell us who they are, or is there a prohibition against that because you may have had their organizations penetrated? And the second question is, do you expect the National Guard to be activated, and do you need their help, their numbers?
Thank you, Rich. No, we do not need, nor do we think it's wise for the National Guard to be in New York City, nor any armed forces. I'm going to tell you why. This is really important we have this out right now. Someone needs a history lesson. When outside armed forces go into communities, no good comes of it. We have seen this for decades. Go back to the 50s, 60s with the civil rights movement on through, all the way up to today. People who are not trained for the conditions of New York City, they're public servants. They protect us in a different way. I appreciate them deeply, but they're not trained for the circumstance here. They have not been spending decades working on the relationship between police and community, particularly in the intensive way it's been worked on in recent years. Every officer out there, and some of them are imperfect because we're all human beings, but the vast majority are doing their job, doing it well, doing it with restraint because they've been trained incessantly to act with restraint. A National Guard, a member of the Guard called up from any part of this state, doesn't have that particular training, doesn't know our environment, but is carrying a loaded weapon. That is a bad scenario. So far, thank God we have not had a loss of life in these last 5 days. But you bring outside armed forces into an equation that they are not trained for, people who could be very, very unnerved by the dynamics that our police officers have learned to work with and deal with, that is a dangerous scenario. So I want to just put down the marker. The National Guard should not be brought here. We have 36,000 police officers. They are the best equipped to deal with this situation. And you know what will help them deal with the situation? Not the National Guard. The people of New York City are much more powerful than anything the National Guard could do. The true, authentic leaders of communities, members of the clergy, come out now. I'm calling you out. Civic leaders, block associations, come out now and stand up for peace, stand up against anyone who would do looting, stand up against anyone who would attack a police officer. I know our communities. I know how many good people there are. I know how many stakeholders there are who will not accept this violence. But they now need to come to the fore. I've said about the Cure Violence movement, crucial piece of the equation. Come to the fore. Stand up. Come to the fore. Do not let looters, and there are not that many in the scheme of a city of 8 million people. Do not let criminals, do not let gang members, do not let anarchists get to call the shots. It's your community, you call the shots. So, Rich, I've given you my answer on the National Guard. In terms of who's instigating, we see a pattern all over the country. There is a group of people, in some cases from outside the city, in some cases inside, but we're seeing the same pattern in a number of cities, a mix of people in that city and outside. To some extent organized, to some extent trained or sharing protocols, negative, violent protocols for how to create mayhem, how to create chaos, how to get it on video, how to attack police officers. We're seeing such a clear pattern. Anyone who doesn't see that isn't looking very hard. So yeah, there is a pattern. I'm not saying about you, Rich. I'm just saying in general. Anyone wants to deny a pattern we're seeing over and over and over again, give me a break. You're not trying if you can't see it. We're providing as much evidence as we can. I know Deputy Commissioner Miller did a briefing. I've asked him to keep doing briefings with the press. Every day he's got new information to try and show you the pattern. Obviously, what we can show, there may be some things we can't. It's clear there is an organized piece to this. That's not the only thing going on. Because last night in the Bronx, I think there were gang members. I don't know if they were organized by anyone but their own gang to do harm to their neighborhood. We see people just common criminals. Yes, that exists in our society. Some people are just career criminals. We saw some of them out looting in Midtown. They are small in number, but they made an impact, and we will not allow it. So there is a pattern. Our job is to show you all the information we can show you to help people understand that pattern. But I'd say to anyone, if you see someone attempting to loot, you need to immediately get away from that and alert the police. If you see anybody in a protest against gay violence, you need to report that person immediately and separate from that person. Rich, one more thing. We have been seeing that all over New York City, too. We've been seeing members of protests throwing violent people out of their protests. In fact, again, it will not be reported. I challenge any of you to report this. I'll be very interested to see if even a single one of you will take me up on it. There were peaceful protesters who rejected the violent elements and forced them out of protests. There were Cure Violence members who told folks who wanted to foment violence to get out of protest. There were elected officials and clergy who said to people, if you're going to protest in our community, it must be peaceful. If you attempt any violence, we will reject you. That is what was happening more and more on Sunday and Monday. That ultimately is the big story here. Community people taking back their own city.
Joe from Politico is up next. Joe.
Hi, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Joe. How you doing?
Not too bad. I had two questions for you. You said earlier that the protesters have been heard, and there are reforms underway. I'm wondering if you could run through some of the things that are in motion, or you can commit to, and in particular, the city council is going to hear legislation banning chokeholds, which I think you opposed last time around in 2014. And so, in particular, I'm curious if your position has changed at all. And secondly, I'm curious if you said before that curfews can have downsides, and I think you were hesitant before we had our first one to impose it. So I'm curious if you can talk about why you think 8 p.m. Is realistic for people that, even peaceful protests that have been out much longer than that. I think people are nervous it's going to serve as an excuse for further crackdowns. Thank you.
Joe, I appreciate the questions. Let me start with, I'll talk about the chokehold bill quickly and then go to the curfew. First, you said, what are the reforms? In addition to the end of the broken unconstitutional policy of stop and frisk, settling the Central Park 5 case, retraining the entire police force, and now doing it constantly in de-escalation, reducing the number of gun discharges deeply, diversifying the police force, adding body cameras to every police officer, ending marijuana arrests. I could go on for a while, but I think you're getting the point, Joe. In addition to that, we are going to improve and speed the process. The appropriate, the legal, appropriate, due process rights-based approach to police discipline, it must go faster. And we will ensure it goes faster. We will do a better job of addressing police officers who don't seem to fit in a precinct or be able to work with communities. We will do a better job of removing those few, and they are few, who do not belong in our police force. We have a tremendous opportunity to pass the repeal of the 50A law in Albany. We are staring in the face a historic moment here to once and for all get rid of a law that has held back transparency and undermined the relationship between police and community. But we must add a new law that protects the identities and the personal information of police officers in a way that might endanger them. I do not want any police officer's home address made public. Remember, our police officers are asked to arrest people who mean harm to us. There's some bad people out there who therefore mean harm to our officers. We cannot in any way endanger our officers, but you can strike a balance and have disciplinary information out in a transparent fashion without in any way undermining our officers. We need to do that. The chokehold situation, this has been, I think, profoundly misunderstood from the beginning. This city for decades has had a prohibition on chokeholds. The day the horrible tragedy of Eric Garner, that day, the day that occurred, the day he was killed, Bill Bratton, 24 hours later, right here in this room, had a picture up of that incident, and the police commissioner of New York City, one of the most renowned police leaders of our time, said, that looks like a chokehold to me. and therefore made clear that's not acceptable. So the fact is, it's been banned in New York City by the rules of our police department for decades. The idea of codifying that, I could very much support, so long as there is recognition that sometimes a police officer is in a life and death struggle as part of their work, and I do not want to see any officer harmed legally if they were simply trying to protect their own life. This is very different than what we're talking about in other situations that people are rightfully upset about, where chokeholds were applied inappropriately. In those instances, consequences are absolutely appropriate for any police officer who does the wrong thing, like the officers involved in the killing of George Floyd, all of whom should pay the price for what they did. So I'm going to work with the City Council. I'm confident we can strike the right balance and get to a bill that makes sense. On the curfew, I don't think any of us were enthusiastic. I wasn't, Commissioner wasn't, and we do see downsides to a curfew. And honestly, Joe, till 9 p.m. on Sunday, I think we were absolutely in the right place because we looked at the overall situation from Thursday all the way to 9 p.m. Sunday. There were tense moments, there were difficult moments, there was a lot of things that we would like to have done better, but there was no loss of life. There were not, to that point, major injuries. There were some bad things that happened. Some people got injured, including police officers. I feel for every one of them. But if you look from Thursday night to Sunday night, things were being held together in a very complex, ever-shifting dynamic. Sunday night was when we saw something we hadn't seen before, and that was the very localized looting in Lower Manhattan. That's what made us feel something had to then be different. And that's when we got together, the Commissioner and I, with the Governor, we decided in the scheme of things, curfew made sense, and we would start it for a later hour, understanding how the city, the rhythms of the city are different than a lot of other places. To your question about the protesters, to finish up,